Begin Self-Publishing, episode number 43. How not to launch a book.
Interested in self-publishing but don't know where to start? Want to get your book onto Amazon? Want to hold your paperback book in your hands? Learn how on the Begin Self-Publishing podcast with your host, Tim Lewis.
As I go through the process of releasing my new book, I do realise that I've basically really failed in most efforts that people consider normal in launching a book. I haven't yet done any publicity at all for the new book, and to be honest, the main reason for that is that I haven't done the right amount of planning for the book launch. I've never been a great book launcher. I'm probably going to try and get on somebody to actually interview who has done a successful book launch. My biggest problem is that I've not really been dedicated in my commitment to the book in terms of spending time to plan out and actually launch the book. I've been distracted by this podcast and my so far failed efforts to actually create some training and other things on the back of it. And also the fact that I've got several conferences and other things that are coming up that are also taking my attention away. I'm probably going to record a few fairly short episodes of this podcast to keep the podcast going while I'm away at some conferences, starting with the London Book Fair next week. The only good thing about those conferences is it'll probably mean that I'll be able to get some decent interviews arranged with people while I'm at them, which will mean that later on you'll get the advantage. But the next few weeks you're probably going to end up with some shorter episodes. So on the question of book launches, why do people do book launches? It's not quite as important as it used to be as in the days of the paperback book. The days of the paperback book, the reason people did book launches was to ensure that bookstores continued to sell their books. So there's a whole stock issue with a book launch. So if you didn't do a book launch and you had your book in a bookstore and nobody bought it, then what would happen is all the bookstores would just not sell any copies and then return all your books, and your book would be considered a failure. So in traditional publishing, book launches are very, very important. Similarly, there is a slight reason for doing book launches for ebooks. This is all because of Amazon's new release charts, and it gives you 30 days for your book to appear in those charts. So if you get a big surge of sales at the beginning, then that's going to be good for your book. It's also a way for the author to actually feel that they're celebrating the launch of their book. It's a psychological thing. There's a lot to be said for launching a book. But I've just kind of been too busy. I've done a bit of marketing, as I've said, attempting to revive sales in my previous book. Just so far, I haven't been that successful. But I've still got a few things that are in the pipeline for that. So you never know. I'm probably going to end up doing a big giveaway for my first book to try and get some emails to push through to sales in the second book. But there's no way that's going to be ready in the first 30 days of the publication of the book, which is now available on Amazon. But not having a book release isn't the end of the world, as books still sell. And there's still, I believe, even though I've managed to disprove myself, still possible to revive sales in an old book. It's a lot more work than doing it on a book launch. But a lot of it's all down to organisation. I think you need to consider when you're launching a book that you've got enough time before and after it to actually handle it properly, rather than trying to do 1,001 other things. Maybe if you're a full-time worker, take some time off around the book launch to be able to do things like push out emails and social media and do all the rest of it. Not that I'm convinced that just doing a social media push is enough nowadays, unless you've got a very big following. I think there is a lot to be said for this idea that you almost have a long 3 to 6 month release period before the book where you're gradually building up interest. It's the same thing as talked about in previous episodes. There is in many cases a trade-off between time and money. So you can either do a very concentrated book launch around the time that you do your book launch and spend a lot of money on it, or you can spend a lot of time and maybe not spend quite so much on doing a book launch. I've managed to combine an approach that use neither of them, which is why I'm not expecting massive sales from the second book in the series. However, I think that doesn't mean the book series is dead, but it may mean that actually I need to plan properly for when I do the third book in the series next year. Be a lot easier if I wasn't doing podcasting and I wasn't trying to write apps and I wasn't trying to do all these other online business things as well as writing books. If I just concentrated on this for a while, and I'd probably be more successful. But I find the podcast more fun and more interesting than the book writing. So I'll keep on writing the books, but I'm only going to do that as a sort of side hustle thing. I'll probably write the next book in NaNoWriMo like I did the last two. So anyway, expect a few more short shows like this over the next couple of weeks. And hopefully I'll be able to provide you some really good interviews with people who I've met at these various conferences I'm going to. Talk to you guys next week.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please stop by iTunes and rate and leave a review. This helps make the show more visible. For free resources, show notes, and other helpful content, join the community at beginselfpublishing.com.